Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the Daily Gwei Refuel, where we recap the latest news in the Ethereum ecosystem. I'm your host, Anthony Sassano, and today is the 27th of May, 2024. Alright everyone, let's get into it. So a lot to get through today. I am going to try and catch up on the biggest things, I guess, over the last couple of weeks that I missed and talk about them. There were a lot of suggestions in the Daily Gwei Discord channel as well of things to talk about, so I'm going to cover all of that. This episode will probably go longer than 30 minutes again, but I think this will be the last one where I cover kind of previous news, older news, I guess. It's only 2 weeks old, but still old news. But tomorrow I'll be kind of going back to the regular scheduled kind of 24-hour news coverage instead of just doing coverage from 2 weeks ago, because I know that I wasn't around, but I want to cover it because I think it's important, but it's also really old news. When it comes to crypto, I mean, week-old news is like very, very old, right? But I'm going to cover all of that. But before I dive into that, I do want to just quickly note for you guys that there'll be no refuels on Thursday and Friday this week. I know I just got back, but unfortunately I have a medical procedure on Thursday. I'm going to be in hospital for a day. It's nothing serious, but I am not going to be able to do the refuel. It's a recovery time of a few days there. So I'm doing that on Thursday, going to be in the hospital till Friday, basically, and I don't think I'm going to be able to do one on Friday either. So I'll be back next Monday, but there'll be episodes, obviously, tomorrow being Tuesday and Wednesday, and today you're listening to it, but there'll be no refuels on Thursday or Friday. So very sorry about that, guys. I know, as I said, I just got back, but unfortunately, that's kind of how the timing lined up there. But now that that's out of the way, let's dive into some of the news. So first up, I want to talk about core dev related stuff. So obviously, there has been a lot of movement on the Pectra upgrade over the last few weeks. For those of you who have seen this on Twitter, a lot of the core devs have been tweeting about it. I know there was a little back and forth about this as well on Twitter while I was away. A little bit of drama, but I don't want to really focus on that because I feel like that just takes away from all the good that's been happening. So essentially, it seems like Pectra is not going to ship by the end of this year. I think I speculated on this like maybe even a couple months ago or a few months ago, where I said that it's a tall order to ship Pectra by the end of this year, given that there are a bunch of things going in that require, quite a bit of work, and also Pectra is a pretty broad upgrade generally. Now, Giorgio's here from the Paradigm team who's working on Reth, put together some of his own thoughts on this recently, where he said some more up-to-date thoughts on the next hard fork, which is Pectra. Ship Pectra by end of Q1 2025. Include PeerDAS for rollups to scale, and include EOF for improving the EVM on both L1 and L2. And there's a longer document that was linked here, which I'll link in the YouTube description below. But there is a little bit of back and forth about this right now. I think that there was the idea entertained that we could split Pectra up into two little hard forks so that we would have one by the end of this year and one early next year. But personally, from the outside looking in, I don't think that would actually work. I feel like that would add just more overhead. It would add more kind of complexity to everything. It would just add more, I guess, like work to do rather than just doing it in Q1. I don't think anyone's actually clamoring right now for any upgrade to go live. Obviously, with Shapala, it was pretty critical because it enabled staking withdrawals, and obviously Denkun was pretty critical as well because of 4844. But right now, blobs aren't at capacity. So PeerDAS is awesome. I've talked about PeerDAS before about how it's going to enable rollups to scale even greater than what they are right now. But that's the data side. Right now, the main bottleneck for rollups is still on the computation or the execution side, which is the L2 or rollup. They have to deal with that. It's not got to do with L1. L1 is really just data, right? And blobs, as I said, are not at capacity yet, so we're not really getting the push that we had in the past for upgrades. So I do think that we can wait until Q1 or to 2025 to ship Pectra. Now, of course, PeerDAS and other kind of related updates aren't the only things that are going to be going into Pectra. There's a broad spectrum of things, including my favorite Max EB. But again, I feel like we can wait for these things. I feel like those things aren't critical. I feel like it's not worth kind of adding more overhead. It's not worth adding more risk. It's not worth adding more work for the core developers just to ship this thing by end of year. I feel like shipping it early next year is just fine there. But there are ongoing conversations around that in terms of timelines. But if I had to put money on it, I would definitely say that it happens in Q1 of next year, it being Pectra rather than later this year. So there was a lot kind of happening on those conversations, and they'll continue to evolve on the core devs calls. Now, of course, Tim Byko had a thread recently covering the latest core dev call, and I wanted to kind of just drill into this tweet here, where essentially there was a DevNet that was launched while I was away. So this is DevNet 0 of Pectra, and all clients managed to join the network, but given the uncertainty around 3074, not much testing of that EIP has been done. That's another thing that I missed covering as well. It seems like EIP 3074 was initially included in Pectra, but it's kind of on the fence now. And this is the account abstraction EIP, because I think Vitalik proposed another EIP. I think it was 7,000 and something. I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head. I saw it somewhere. But yeah, he proposed that as I believe, a replacement, or at least it goes alongside 3074 to take away the risks that were associated with 3074. I have to dig deeper into that. I haven't had time. There's just been so much to catch up on, but it's great to see that we have a DevNet going already. As you guys know, the typical process is DevNets, testnets, and mainnet, and then in between all of that is shadow forks of mainnet, of course, and that's all happening as it usually does, which is great to see going on there. But what's really exciting, actually, outside of the DevNet being live, is the fact that PeerDAS is probably going to make it into Pectra. Now, just a refresher on what PeerDAS is, essentially it allows us to scale blobs up even further, because it enables the use of, I guess, what would traditionally be known as sharding, where essentially only a subset of nodes have to have a subset of data. So DAS being data availability sampling. And this, I believe, is like it's like a proto, or I guess like prototype is probably the good word. Prototype version of like full dank sharding, full data availability sampling, and data availability sharding generally there. So PeerDAS is very exciting. But as I said before, because we're not at capacity with blobs yet, there's no one clamoring at the door. But that could change very quickly, guys. Like, I mean, we're going into the next leg of the bull market, I believe, obviously with the ETH ETFs being approved. The Ethereum ecosystem is heating up again. Layer 2s continue to grow. They're at all-time high activity and all-time high TVL and all that good stuff there. But we still have time right now, obviously, because blobs aren't at capacity. But that could change very quickly. So I'm very glad to see that PeerDAS is being worked on kind of there, and potentially could make it into Pectra alongside the other great EIPs that I've talked about in the past. But you can go give Tim Byko's thread a read for yourself to check out everything that was going on there. As I said, I'm still catching up on all the core dev stuff that I missed, because there was a lot of movement happening. So I did want to touch on something that was related to Pectra, but basically goes beyond that. So the Ethereum L1 client research, testing, and DevOps teams gathered at a week-long interoperability event, or an offsite, which focused on Pectra, PeerDAS, and Verkle. And Tim said here, we also hosted a first of its kind community event for African builders, and here's a full recap. So this is great. I mean, not only did they get together in a place where I guess like they haven't gone before, or at least they haven't been kind of very active before in Africa, but they've also gotten together to really nut out the details of the next 2 years worth of Ethereum upgrades here. Because as you guys know, Verkle trees looks like it will be, or Verkle generally looks like it will be, as part of the next upgrade after Pectra, hopefully. I mean, there's a lot of work happening there. You guys know that the best place to keep up with that is at verkle.info, which I'll link in the YouTube description below for you. I'll just bring it up here on my screen as well. But at this interoperability event, as I said, they worked on not only Verkle, but PeerDAS, and launched Pectra DevNet 0, as well as a bunch of other stuff, I'm sure. I mean, look at this picture here. Just a collection of the biggest gigabrains within the Ethereum ecosystem. You know, not all of the core devs and researchers, but a lot of them there. And it's great to see them all getting together to nut these things out. Because not the last time they do this, but every time they do this, things seem to progress really, really quickly on some of the, I guess, critical things within the Ethereum ecosystem. I remember when they did this for launching the proof of stake beacon chain. So this is way back in like 2019, 2020, they were doing a lot of these offsite events, because launching that in of itself was a huge deal. And then obviously with the merge, they did more events around that too. But there are always critical things that need to be worked on here. And I think that for the next in a couple of years, obviously the most critical things have got to do with, on layer 1, have got to do with Ethereum scalability and making sure that rollups can continue to scale as they have been. But on top of that, also allowing for more stability and more reliability of the chain with things like the Verkle upgrade, statelessness, state expiry, and also tackling MEV. So there's a lot of work still left to do. You guys know about Vitalik's Ethereum roadmap, and that is still being executed on. That has not really changed in any kind of fashion from what I've seen. Yes, like technical details of each thing will change, but the general roadmap is that essentially, and those are the things that are being executed on there, and those are the things that are being worked on there. And I believe probably not all of the people in this picture, but I would say that most of them are recipients of the Protocol Guild funds as well. So just great to see these people being rewarded for this work now, because traditionally in the past they were rewarded for it, but in different ways, where essentially there wasn't a central kind of, I guess, like a public goods funding source for them. It was more that they were part of a team and they'd raise money from somewhere, or they get acquired by another team, or they'd be funded by another team, or they'd rely on donations, and and so on and so forth. Or they'd just be self-funded in other ways. So I'm glad that they have something in the protocol guild there. But you can go check out this blog post recap that Tim put out. I'll link it in the YouTube description below for you to do so. But yeah, I mean, as I said, guys, a lot of stuff happened on the core devs front. I will definitely keep up to date with it and kind of relay that to you guys. But I think that, I mean, the TLDR is really just progress is continuing on the Pectra upgrade. Looks like that will ship in Q1 2025 instead of the end of this year. A lot of progress is being made on things outside of Pectra as well, such as Verkle trees and things got to do with MEV as well. Are always being worked on, but yeah, they're not slowing down, really. I mean, it's always kind of funny when I see some of the FUD around, especially like the FUD that happened while I was away, right, while I was on my break, where people were saying that, oh, Ethereum is washed, Ethereum is cooked, no one uses it, no one cares about it, blah, blah, blah. And I saw those comments and I'm like, that doesn't even, it's not even FUD. It's like just straight outright lies. Like, it doesn't even make any sense when you match it with reality. The reality is that the core development and core research ecosystem of Ethereum has never been in a better place, ever. Like, I know I say that from, sometimes, like every couple of months or something, but it just keeps getting better. Not only are they extremely well funded now via the Protocol Guild and other efforts, but they're also a well-oiled machine at this point, and they're also executing on a well-defined roadmap. So those three things alone, I mean, there's plenty of other stuff that goes into it, but those three things alone are enabling a global coordination of people to essentially execute on one of the most ambitious technical roadmaps in the world. At least that's what I believe, and in doing it all in public as well. Because as I've said before, the reason why the Ethereum ecosystem gets so much heat is because it does everything in public. Like, absolutely everything happens in public. The core dev calls and research happens in public. All the conversations happen in public, especially on Twitter and other places there. The Discord channels are all public. Very rarely are things happening in private, and if they are, it's probably just DMs between different people talking about things that they're talking about in public anyway, right? So it's all happening publicly. Whereas if you're working at a traditional Web 2 company, such as like a big Web 2 company, such as Apple or Microsoft or so on and so forth, you're not working in the public, right? You're working in a very kind of private environment where everything is locked down. You have code names for everything because you don't want things to leak. All of your latest product stuff in R&D is like many years out, but no one knows what's happening because of the fact that you haven't publicly announced it yet. It hasn't gone through your PR machine. Whereas in Ethereum, there's no filter. It's basically all out there. It's all out in the open, and it's all out for everyone to criticize, everyone to see. And that's exactly why these things happen. Whereas if you were seeing the internal, I guess, like development and research of what goes on at these big tech companies, it would be the same thing. And on top of that as well, the cool thing, at least I think, but also I guess like can lead to negative externalities, is that anyone can have a say when it comes to Ethereum development. Like, you just have to prove your merit. You essentially need to prove that you know what you're talking about to start with, right? But anyone can have a say. Anyone can get involved with it. And there's been countless examples of this over the years of people just coming out of nowhere, really smart people, and making a difference within the Ethereum core protocol and beyond that as well. So just wanted to add that note there to dispel some of the FUD that I'd been seeing flying around while I was on break. And as I said to you guys, I went back and checked a bunch of that stuff, and it was just pointless, guys. I'm very glad that I didn't have to be exposed to any of that, because it had literally no bearing on anything. I mean, during all of that, ETH was what, $3,000? The Ethereum ecosystem, well, I guess like the Ethereum network and the layer 2s was still thriving. And now, a couple of weeks later, ETH is at almost $4,000. The ETH ETFs are happening. Suddenly everyone's bullish on ETH just because Ethereum just because ETH went up, when we all know the reality here, guys. So yeah, just figured I'd kind of let you guys know my thoughts on that one there. All right, moving on from core dev stuff into another big announcement that happened, and it happened actually shortly after I took my break, and that was the Eigen Foundation launched the Eigen token. Now, you guys know I'm an investor, an angel investor in Eigen, in EigenLayer. I am not an advisor to EigenLayer. Some people are saying that I am, which was weird. I'm not an advisor to EigenLayer. I know that there are a bunch of people like the Bankless guys that are, and maybe people thought that I was as well. No, I'm an angel investor. But really, when it comes to, I guess, all the same, all the similar things that go into each of those. I think advisor, angel investor. I mean, I have exposure to it, right? I have private exposure to it, which I think is basically the same thing. But yeah, I just wanted to clarify that bit there. But I also wanted to put that out there because you guys know I like being transparent. But I have a lot of thoughts about this, not particularly about the token itself or anything like that, but more so with the reactions to the token. So first thing I'll start off with is that when it comes to the token itself, they have a new design around the token that a lot of you guys have read. You know, they're not just putting this out there as a useless governance token. It is also meant to act as a utility token for the EigenLayer ecosystem. And the way they're doing that is through something called a subjectivity workflow token, I believe. There's some buzzwords in there that they used, but essentially this is probably one of the most interesting token designs I've seen in quite a while. And what I got really upset about, because you guys know I took my Twitter break on May 6th, so from April 30th, when this was announced, till May 6th, which was about a week, I saw the reactions to this and I was reading them on Twitter. What really upset me is that people always complain about the tokens, or most of the tokens, being useless, right? They're useless governance tokens, they do nothing. And then EigenLayer comes along, or the Eigen Foundation comes along and says, hey, we have this Eigen token. Yes, okay, it is a governance token, but hey, it can do so much more than governance, and here's what it can do. And then people shit all over it. It's like, okay, like, I understand being critical of it. I understand giving constructive feedback to the team. I understand maybe you don't think it's a good idea, but hey, we should be encouraging teams to do this, because if we don't, then essentially teams are not going to want to keep doing this. They're not going to want to keep experimenting. They're just going to launch this useless governance token. They're going to be fine with it because it's their exit, you know, and their VCs are going to be fine with it because they got in really early. So what ends up happening is that the ecosystem is just far worse off for it. At least in EigenLayer's case, they came up with this new token design, which I thought was quite interesting. Now, of course, I'm not going to dive really deeply into the token design because I'm sure it's going to change over time here, but yeah, that was one kind of thing that I saw that I really wanted to touch on there. Now, with regards to a few other things on this, the other thing that I think that people wanted me to talk about was the conflicts of interest between the advisors to EigenLayer, or the ones that have been publicly revealed since the token went live, and the Ethereum core protocol. So for those of you who don't know, Justin Drake and Dan Kradfeist, two of the most well-known Ethereum core researchers, have joined as advisors to EigenLayer, and they are getting a substantial amount of Eigen tokens. These are their words, not mine, for being an advisor to EigenLayer. Now, of course, this I guess like stirred up the hive, as you can say, right, for a number of different reasons. Obviously, the biggest reason is that people strongly believe that this is a massive conflict of interest, since Justin and Dan Krad both have huge voices within the Ethereum core protocol itself. And you know what? I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I do want to add my kind of take here on why I don't necessarily think it is a big issue, and I don't necessarily think that people are looking at what a conflict of interest is in the right frame of thinking here. So when it comes to conflicts of interest generally, I think that actions speak for themselves, right? So if you say that someone has a conflict of interest and they're saying something that they would only say because they're getting paid to say it, or they have a bag in saying it, that's pretty obvious, right? Like, we see the VCs do this all the time. You go on Twitter and you see a VC shilling something, you're like, okay, well, that VC obviously is invested in that. And they won't shill things that they're not invested in, right? They won't talk about things that they're not invested in. It's very obvious that they have a conflict of interest there, where essentially they're conflicted, where they want to pump their own bags and they don't want to pump the other bags that are competing with them. And we see this all the time. Like, I'm sure you guys have seen this. I don't have to elaborate on that because it's quite obvious here. So in the same kind of line of thinking, if Justin Drake or Dan Krad were to act like that towards EigenLayer now that they've joined as advisors, where they were compromising the Ethereum core protocol, doing things within the Ethereum core protocol research sphere that would be seen as a conflict of interest, where they're pushing EigenLayer's interests rather than the Ethereum core protocol's interest, then that would be quite obvious, I think, because people are very sensitive to this, especially within the core developing environment. Because who do you think pays attention to core development stuff? It's really the people who are the most involved with the Ethereum ecosystem and the most sensitive to anything negative happening within the Ethereum ecosystem. Like, look how quickly people reacted to the proposal to change the issuance of Ethereum recently to deal with too much ETH being staked. Like, that was within like a day, basically, of it being posted, of the research post being put out there. and the researchers saying, hey, we want to get this included in Pectra, the hive just went nuts over it. And yeah, I've talked about this in the past, and I said that I think that there was an overreaction of the immune system here, but it still shed light on it, and it still kind of sounded the alarm bells. So I think that the same thing would happen here if, for example, Justin or Dankrat was to start pushing things in Ethereum core development that would essentially compromise the core protocol, or at least do something in the core protocol that would favor EigenLayer specifically. I think that would be quite obvious, because as I mentioned before, everything within the Ethereum ecosystem, when it comes to the core protocol, is done out in the open. It's all open source. It's all publicly documented there. But also, on top of that, conflicts of interest can come from anywhere. It doesn't have to come from just monetary conflicts of interest. I would argue that the ideological and social conflicts of interest are more powerful than the monetary ones, especially for people like Justin and Dankrat, which, yes, okay, they care about money. I'm not going to speak for them, but obviously they care about money just like everyone else does. But I do think that people like Justin and Dankrat are very ideologically, motivated, more so than monetarily motivated. And I think that a good example of this is that Justin Drake gets criticized all the time for the ultrasound money meme. People say, oh, he only came up with that to pump his ETH bags. And the thing is that you can't prove that he didn't come up with that to pump his ETH bags, but there's nothing wrong with that either. If you are invested in something and you're invested, your whole life's invested in it, why wouldn't you want to get more attention on it? Why wouldn't you want to promote the, positives of that thing? That's what I do with Ethereum as well. It's what I do with ETH. I'm heavily invested in ETH, obviously, and so is everyone else in the Ethereum ecosystem. And we want to see ETH do well for a number of different reasons, not just for our own personal wealth, but also for the fact that we understand that ETH number go up is very good for the Ethereum ecosystem. It brings more attention in, it brings more developers in, brings more users in, and really there's nothing else better out there in terms of marketing Ethereum. So, even though Justin gets criticized for this, I believe he didn't just do it to pump his bags or anything like that. I believe that he came up with the meme because of the fact that he wanted to market or advertise or essentially bring more attention to Ethereum's monetary policy, which he and I also believe this is the best in the crypto ecosystem. I believe Ethereum's is the best and most sustainable monetary policy that we have, and ultrasound money, is a bit of a meme to poke fun at Bitcoiners for saying that Bitcoin's sound money and so on and so forth. But still, that is something that people would criticize Justin for and say that he has a conflict here. He pushes ultrasound money because he just wants to pump his ETH bags, right? So I think to summarize what I'm saying here is that conflicts of interest are very hard generally because they're not just monetary, they're also ideological stuff and social stuff. Think about all the incentives, all the different incentives at play in the personal relationships between the core developers and researchers. I'm sure there are certain things that certain core developers and researchers won't say to each other because they're friends, right? They're not going to be as brutally honest as someone else would be because they have a direct personal relationship with that person. And I think when you take that lens, I think that, as I said, is more powerful than the monetary stuff, because at the end of the day, these core developers and researchers, they're humans as well. They're directly affected by their personal relationships, directly affected by the monetary incentives, and directly affected by their ideological incentives. And that all has to come together to push forward the Ethereum ecosystem. So when it comes to conflict of interest, specifically with EigenLayer, with Justin Drake and Dankrat and whoever else, I don't know if there's others out there, but I do know that there's those two. There's the bankless guys, but obviously David and Ryan aren't core developers. There's me as an investor, and there are a lot of investors in EigenLayer as well. But I think that you can be invested in something while also being critical of it. And I think that Justin explained this in his tweet, and so did Dankrat. They both basically said that they joined based on a bunch of conditions. And the conditions were essentially that they wouldn't obviously favor EigenLayer. If they felt like at any time EigenLayer was doing things that would harm the Ethereum protocol, they would leave as advisors. I mean, you can go read their tweets for yourself. It's all kind of written there, but I think that people just had this visceral reaction where they said, "Oh, look how easy it is to pay off the Ethereum core developers." If you're a big project, which I think is the wrong take here. I think that because everything is done out in the open and done publicly, I think that we would very easily be able to spot if anything was being pushed by Justin and Dankrat to directly benefit EigenLayer, especially at the expense of not only the Ethereum core protocol, but other projects building on Ethereum, aka to compromise Ethereum's credible neutrality. But at the same time, I do think that Justin and Dankrat have enough kind of, I guess, personal integrity not to do that either. I mean, like, it's also reputational too. Like, how much is their reputation in the ecosystem worth versus pushing forward something that may or may not affect the value of the Eigen token, right? Because at the end of the day, there are certain tokens that don't perform well even though they have a large market share. Look at the Lido token, for example, has a huge market share. The Aldero token is one of the worst performing tokens. It's just basically sideways because of the I mean, I've mentioned this before, because of the overhang from the early investors, but also people just don't want to buy it for some reason. I'm not going to speculate on why, but just because you do something that benefits a protocol doesn't mean that would drive value to the token as well. So really, when you kind of put out the game theory on this, it doesn't really make much sense from that perspective there. And I guess, like, lastly, what I wanted to mention here as well is that while I was thinking about all of this, this is exactly why the most functional and free nations in the world have checks and balances on power structures, because you can't trust anyone, really. I mean, you can't build a system based on just trusting one person, right? Or just trusting one organization. You have to have checks and balances on power. That's why democracy works. I mean, it is the least worst system, but it works to an extent. It works better than any of the other systems we have out there, right? Or the ones that we've tried in the past. And it works because it has checks and balances on power. And it also is up to the people a lot of the time, right? In fair democracies. I mean, there are some out there that aren't as fair as others. I don't want to go into the whole politics of it all, but of course you have this kind of thing where essentially there are these checks and balances in place. And I think within the Ethereum ecosystem, we do have that, but they're less formal. They're not formal checks and balances where you have like the House, the Senate, the judicial branch, the president, so on and so forth. You have essentially a flat organization where there are no leaders, there are no people who basically can dictate. Or I shouldn't say there's no leaders, there's no dictators that can say what goes on. It's really just completely open to anyone to come in, have a say. Definitely people like Justin and Dan Crab would have way more weight behind their words than someone else just new coming in, but that's earned over time, over many, many years of working within the Ethereum core protocol. That reputation is earned. And hey, that reputation can be destroyed overnight if they were to do something that was to compromise the Ethereum core protocol at the benefit of their advisor bags, whether that be EigenLayer or something else out there. So yeah, anyway, I just wanted to cover that because I know people were interested in my take on the conflicts of interest when it came to the Eigen token here. But yeah, I think that's everything I'll say on EigenLayer. Now, before I jump into the rest of the stuff that people told me to speak about. Actually, this is one of the things that people told me to speak about, and I completely missed this while I was on break. So you guys probably know this by now, but Alexey Pertsev, one of the co-founders of Tornado Cash, was found guilty of laundering $1.2 billion worth of crypto and has been sentenced to more than 5 years behind bars. Now, we all know this is bullshit. We all know that the only reason that he was prosecuted was to make an example out of him. We all know that this was done as a chilling effect on people building privacy tools. Essentially, what the Netherlands government is saying here, and by extension probably even like other governments around the world, is that if you build privacy tools and if it all is being used for money laundering, which there are some choice quotes in here that imply that all it's used for is money laundering, then you're going to go to jail. That's the message that they want to send. And hey, that's a pretty effective message because no one wants to go to jail, especially not for writing open source code and not for putting tools out there that can be used for both good and bad. But some of the quotes in this Wired article were kind of wild to me. So one of them, and I believe this is from the judge, where they said he, being Alexey, chose to look away from the abuse and did not take any responsibility. And the reason why the judge said this is because the judge continues and says, Pertsev made choices writing the code, deploying the code, adding features to the ecosystem, choice after choice, all the while he knew that criminal money was entering his system. So there's a lot to unpack in just that statement there, but essentially what the judge is saying, maybe not the judge, I think this was the prosecutor's argument, sorry, not the judge, I'm maybe misquoting here, but either the judge or the prosecutor was kind of saying this here, was that they essentially put forward the argument, which they won on, obviously, that Alexey was directly involved with this money laundering because of the fact that he allowed it to happen on, quote unquote, his platform, where essentially it was not his platform. Once Tornado Cash was deployed to the Ethereum blockchain, they were no longer in control of it. It's a decentralized protocol on Ethereum. But because the Tornado Cash devs controlled the front end, because they kept adding features to it, because they had so much of the token, essentially the court saw that, okay, well, they are materially involved with this protocol. This protocol is laundering money, so ergo, this person is guilty. That was really essentially what it boiled down to. Now, you can apply this logic to anything, really. Imagine if you applied this same argument to someone, and I'm going to use an obvious example here, but someone that sells, firearms in the US. Let's just use an easy example here, where essentially you could say that, well, this person knew that some of his customers might be using these firearms to do things that are illegal, but he still sold them to these people, and he still marketed them to these people, and he still increased his business and used the profits and reinvested in his business to grow his business. See where I'm going with this? You can use the same arguments here for firearms, which can be used for good and bad, and you can use the same arguments that we used in the Tornado Cash case here against someone selling firearms. And that's just the really obvious example. There are so many other examples out there of this, guys. What about people who sell all the maybe not people who sell this, but like all of the medications that are sold to people who abuse them, right? Like what about all the stuff that's legally sold to people that abuse them? I mean, in a lot of places now, weed is being legalized, and there's honestly, weed is better than alcohol for you. Not to say that it's good for you, but alcohol is much more damaging for you, and alcohol is maybe the better example here. But it just as a recent example, people can abuse weed as well, right? People can abuse it to the point where it has very detrimental health effects for them. But hey, we don't go after the weed dealers and say, hey, you're selling to these people who are addicts. I'm going to blame you for it. I'm going to arrest you for it. Same as we don't go after people who sell alcohol and dispensaries for weed, but like also shops that sell alcohol. We don't say, okay, we're going to blame you and we're going to go after you because some people abuse alcohol and are alcoholics. So that's where I'm going with this kind of line of argument here, because that's exactly what it reads like to me when I read these quotes, is that you can apply this to anything, and especially when it comes to things that are that are illegal. Obviously when it comes to people being addicts to weed or alcohol, that's not illegal, right? But the firearms example is the proper one here, I think, and is the one example where essentially if you buy a firearm completely legally from a shop owner and you go and kill someone with it, the shop owner is not arrested and prosecuted for you killing someone with it. They are not involved in that case at all, besides basically giving your details over to anyone that's looking into the murder, because obviously they'll get the firearm, they'll know that it was bought from your store, you'll give them the details, and away you go. You're not going to get arrested for selling that gun, right? Whereas this Tornado Cash developer, Alexey and others, were arrested for people using their protocol that they deployed for, I guess, quote unquote nefarious purposes, right? Or quote unquote illegal purposes. And again, that was not the fault of Alexey here, and not the fault of other Tornado Cash developers. So that's my general take on that. But again, guys, this goes back to what I've been saying for probably years now. Governments don't like financial privacy. That's one of the number one things they hate, and they're not going to let us have it easily. Their warrantless surveillance regime was not built on, self-custody. Was not built on people being able to use their own, use their money privately, especially when a lot of the governments around the world are trying to phase out cash. When you're reintroducing privacy back into the financial system via crypto and via things like Tornado Cash, they get very upset because they don't know what to do. They don't know how to regulate it. There's no existing laws for this. So they use a blunt hammer, essentially. They look at this and like, okay, we're going to try and stamp this out in any way that we can. And essentially the best way to stamp it out, or at least the most effective way, I think, is by through fear. And this is exactly what they're doing here. They're just trying to scare off people from building privacy tools and trying to neuter the privacy ecosystem. I don't think they're going to succeed, because Tornado Cash is still live on the network. Yes, it has a lot more usage now. Yes, it is illegal for US citizens and persons to use it. But at the end of the day, the criminals that they're trying to stop from using it are still going to keep using it. And they might even just deploy their own, instances of Tornado Cash or instances of privacy protocols. So really, I don't think it actually helps anything here. And I really feel sorry for Alexey that he's been sentenced to jail for more than 5 years. That's a shit outcome. That's really, really shitty outcome. But honestly, guys, I thought this was going to be the outcome all along. I didn't think it was going to get away with no jail time on this, because as I said, governments absolutely hate financial privacy more than anything for a number of different reasons, which is just shitty for the individual. It's shitty for personal freedoms. But at the end of the day, they hate it enough to essentially make examples out of people and make examples out of people in a really extreme way here. And he is, and Alexey is the sacrificial lamb here. He's basically the example that's being made right now, but there's probably going to be others in the future as well. So we have to keep fighting. We have to keep fighting for financial privacy, but I think the fight's going to have to be done probably anonymously. You can't really tie your identity to these protocols if you're building them, because the message is out there that, hey, you will be found and arrested and prosecuted simply for building these tools, even if you have no control over them, which is, as I said, a really, really crappy outcome, but it is what it is, unfortunately, there. All right, so let's move on to some of the stuff that I said in the Discord channel for me to cover. So MWJAF had a bunch of stuff that they wanted me to cover, and I'm just going to read through the list here for you guys because I think I want to cover a bunch of these things in a lot of detail here. So essentially, the first thing he wanted me to do was to keep the mental health discussions going, because he really appreciates the discussions and the times that I've discussed it with Eric Connor as well. And I agree with that. I think that my break that I took was very, very therapeutic, honestly, and was probably like the best kind of thing I've done in crypto for a very long time because of the fact that it recharged me. It essentially allowed me to discover that there's more to life than crypto again, because I had forgotten about that because I had spent so long in crypto. And I think that you have to do it cold turkey, where essentially you have to kind of not, if you want to take a proper break, you have to take a proper break. You can't just be like, okay, well, I only check Twitter and Discord like 2 times a day. No, I think that a proper like week-long break where you don't do anything crypto related and you just do completely different things is the way to go if you really are serious about taking a break. And I would also recommend taking up something that you don't normally do and starting a new habit, starting a new routine. So for me, on my break, the 2 biggest things I did was I changed my sleeping pattern. So you guys know I used to go to bed at 3 a.m., wake up at 11 a.m. Now I go to bed at 1 a.m., wake up at 9 a.m. I do want to change that to 12 a.m. and get up at 8 a.m. just to have a normal kind of sleeping pattern. It is a lot easier generally because everyone else that I know in my real life works on those hours, doesn't work on my weird hours, right? And it's also just healthier in general, especially in the winter months and the colder months in Melbourne. The sun goes down pretty early, I think like 5 p.m. or something, 5:30 p.m. So I'd rather get more daylight out of it and also more daylight out of my day. And also I started bike riding as much as I can in the mornings, and that was really, really good as well. It's exercise, obviously getting out of the house, so really enjoyed doing all of that. But I will keep up the mental health discussions. We will make sure that people talk about it. People aren't afraid to talk about it. I think at the end of the day, there is too much of a stigma around mental health generally, not just within crypto, but just generally in life. People like to look at it and think that it's a weakness and that they don't want to talk about it because it's a weakness and they shouldn't be feeling this way. And why are they feeling this way? Their life is so good, so on and so forth. But it's not about that. What it's about is essentially having balance and stability in your kind of personal life, in your mind, both in mentally and also physically. Obviously, physically has a lot to do with it too. And given that we're in crypto, a lot of us aren't as physical as we should be because we're in front of computers or in front of screens all day. So I think that making sure that you're exercising regularly, and regularly is always thrown out there as this term that people are supposed to just understand. I think that you need to do at least an hour of exercise a day. I know that may not be possible for people, so half an hour is probably good enough for those who this is not possible for, but I think you need to do at least an hour a day of physical exercise, and at least 30 minutes of that, or half of that, should be relatively intense exercise, just to get the blood flowing, just to keep up being fit. Also doing like stretching routines, meditating as well. All these things that are just keeping you healthy, both physically and mentally, are a must. And then of course also eating healthy is, I think, probably above that, above all else, because a lot of people don't seem to understand, maybe because they aren't taught this as they grow up, or they forget it and they fall into bad habits, that, like, I know it's cliche to say this, but you are what you eat. You are what you put into your body. And there are numerous very, I guess, like strong studies out there that show that your gut and your mind have a direct link to each other. So if you're putting shit food into your body, you're going to feel like shit. It's going to exacerbate the shitty moods that you may already be in. It's going to cause things like a depression to be more for you to suffer from depression in more likely than you otherwise would have. So just eating healthy, getting enough protein, getting enough greens, right, and exercising regularly, it's not a hard thing to do, but you have to get yourself into those habits in order to do that. So yeah, anyway, I'll leave that one at that, but I will keep talking about this as time goes on there. So the next question, or the next thing that MWJ ETH wanted me to cover, was what I thought about staked ETH being a security, and there's obviously different flavors of staked ETH, so what's going to happen with it all? So staked ETH is a tricky one because the SEC, as we know, is not a good regulator. And I don't know what their actual view of this is. It seems like they view any staking as a security, which is, I think, wrong. Because as you guys know, the different flavors of staking include pure solo staking, where essentially you run all your own hardware, you manage all the software yourself, it's all of your own ETH. So how can that be a securities contract or an investment contract? There is no one else doing the work. It's just you doing the work yourself. You're not relying on anyone else to run the hardware and software for you. You're not taking in any other ETH from outside investors. It's all just your own. So I would argue that it's very, very difficult to classify, or at least impossible, to classify solo staking, true solo staking, as a security or an investment contract. It just doesn't meet any prongs of the Howey test, really. But I have discussed in the past how something like Coinbase staking definitely meets at least 3 out of 4 of the prongs of the Howey test. And I've covered this on a previous episode. I don't know which episode it was, but you guys probably remember it. I went into detail about this and I played devil's advocate. Essentially, if I was the lawyer on the SEC side, this is the arguments that I would use. And I think it's going to be difficult for Coinbase to win that part of their case. I think that the SEC may not end up getting Coinbase on the asset side of things, so basically arguing that they trade unregistered securities. But I do think it's going to be very difficult for Coinbase to win the staking portion of the case. I do think the SEC could win on that part. It's not just Coinbase, it's Binance and Kraken as well. I mean, Kraken already folded on that. It's not even just Kraken as well. Kraken literally folded on that. Because these staking operations that are run by Coinbase, Kraken, Binance, whoever, they very much do look like a security or an investment contract because of the fact that it's relying on the efforts of others is only one of the prongs of the Howey test here. But essentially, that would be the argument that was made by the SEC. It's like you're relying on the efforts of others. There is an investment of money, which I think is the weakest prong. There is an expectation of profit, obviously via the yield. But the yield doesn't come from Coinbase. It comes from the Ethereum protocol. But again, you could argue that the yield actually does come from Coinbase because it comes from Coinbase's efforts in running the hardware and software. So you see how I'm going with this. It's a very murky discussion. But then that opens up to the discussion around other staking flavors out there, such as staking pools like Rocket Pool, like newer ones like EtherFi, like Lido, obviously. Like, is that a security? Is that a transaction? Or is that an investment contract? And I actually don't think that they are. And I don't think the SEC would have any luck going after those, especially because a lot of them aren't even based in the US. I mean, Lido itself, I think, has a foundation. But outside of that, the Lido DAO doesn't have a jurisdiction that it's based in. It's a DAO, right? And the Lido node operators, most of them actually exist outside of the US. So I think that Lido would be fine. Rocket Pool would probably be even more fine because of the fact that Rocket Pool is thousands of individual node operators. The Rocket Pool team operates a subset of those. And yes, they develop the software for Rocket Pool, but they aren't running people's validators for them. They aren't running the kind of hardware and software for them. They're all part of like this, I guess, autonomous pool. Obviously, Rocket Pool is a decentralized staking pool, but there's like an autonomous pool there where people put ETH in, it gets matched with other ETH, and then validators get spun up by the node operators, right? And they run it. So again, very hard there. But I think that there's more than 3 flavors here, but really, I guess the summary here is that solo staking, pure solo staking, true solo staking, in my eyes, impossible to deem that as an investment contract or as a security. Centralized exchange staking, highly likely that the SEC could win on this. And it's not just the SEC, it's other securities regulators as well, but highly likely they could win on that, just given the nature of the operation. And then the decentralized staking pools, or even the relatively more centralized ones, would be fine, I think, because they're open pools. They're not run by any kind of central entity here. They're run by different sets of node operators that are based in different sets of jurisdictions here. So I think even on that front, it should be fine. But yeah, I really don't have much confidence in centralized exchange staking operations being able to exist as non-securities. In saying that, though, if it is a security, it actually doesn't matter, because as long as Coinbase can eventually, or even other exchanges out there, can eventually secure a license to trade securities, which they should be able to do, but we know the SEC has been dragging their feet here. But as long as Coinbase could secure that license, then it stands to reason that they should be able to still offer this staking product just in a different way, because they would be allowed to trade securities on the platform, right? So there's a lot to be fleshed out here, but essentially that I think is the crux of it there. So essentially, there's two other things that I want to get through. Sorry, maybe three other things that I want to get through here before I move on to RH's request of what he wanted me to cover here. So this again comes from MWJ ETH, where he said, "Great call on doing Into the Ether. Do you have thoughts on the language branding of the Ether versus Ethereum for non-technical mainstream contexts? I wrote an article about this that you covered on the Refuel back in December. What specific things do you visualize a fully mainstreamed Ethereum technology world looks like that maybe people haven't envisioned yet?" So this might be an unpopular opinion, but I think the vast majority of the world is not really going to know what Ethereum is. And not just because we have like the L2 scaling roadmap, where essentially users will know that they're using Base or they're using Arbitrum, but they won't necessarily know that they're using Ethereum under the hood. I think Ethereum existing as like backend technology is fine. I don't think people need to know what what backend technology is powering the apps that they're using. Just like they don't have to know it in Web 2, right? Like you don't know what backend technology you're using on Twitter or on Facebook or on YouTube. You can look into it and you can find out, because these Web 2 companies have like developer blogs, but the vast majority of people aren't going to do that. So they don't know that that's happening. They just know that, hey, I go to YouTube, I click on a video and away, and I'm in it. I can adjust the volume, right? I can have subtitles on there. I can adjust the quality. That's all running, code in the background. But they don't need to know what that is. They don't need to know what's powering that. They just know that they can do that. So the same is true for like minting an NFT on Base. No one needs to know that Base is secured by Ethereum L1 and it's posting its data down to Ethereum L1 and it's running on fraud proofs, so to catch any bad guys doing anything bad on the network. And no one needs to know any of that. All they need to know is that, hey, I minted an NFT. Maybe they don't even know that they're doing it on Base, right? They're just like, I minted an NFT. It cost me nothing. Here we go, sort of thing. So from that perspective, I think that the particularly branding for Ethereum isn't too, important for like the mainstream audience. Where it becomes important is the branding around ETH as an asset. So I think ETH as an asset doesn't have a central narrative, and I think that's actually a good thing. This gets discussed a lot on Twitter, but I think this is a really good thing that Ethereum or ETH itself doesn't have a central narrative, because you can't shoehorn or you can't like put ETH into a small little box like you can with Bitcoin. Bitcoin's digital gold. Sure, okay, whatever. But you can't be like Ethereum is digital oil, or Ethereum is gas, or Ethereum, or I should say ETH, or ETH is, a store of value, or ETH is a commodity, or ETH is this, ETH is that. ETH is all of that and more. I mean, ETH is programmable money. That's probably the best thing that we can call it, programmable money, because with programmable money, you can have anything. And then we're not even talking about what the Ethereum, the network can do, and what the layer 2s can do, and how that feeds into the ETH, the asset, right? You can stake ETH, you can restake ETH, you can use it as collateral, so on and so, use it as a store of value, use it as money, right? There's so many different things you can do with ETH that I think that we shouldn't be trying to create some central narrative for ETH as an asset. But in saying that, now that ETH has the ETFs, right? Now that ETH has a more, TradFi player base kind of working within its ecosystem, their marketing teams are going to come up with so many different narratives, so many different stories around what Ethereum is, around what ETH is, that crypto Twitter would only dream of being able to come up with, guys. Like these marketing teams, I mean, when it comes to an asset manager like BlackRock, or really any other asset manager out there, their number one goal is to bring in AUM, right? It's to bring in money. How do they do that? They do that via business development, sales, and marketing, right? Particularly sales and marketing, which feeds into business development, right? And sales and business development are kind of hand in hand as well there. And okay, well, if that's what they need to do to bring in money, well, that's where they're going to invest the most amount of money. So they're going to have their BD and sales teams going out to all of their clients, and whether it be one-on-one or through email blasts, constantly telling them, hey, you need crypto exposure. And hey, we have BTC and ETH. And hey, Bitcoin is this, BTC is digital gold, it's a store of value. Hey, but ETH is also that, but it does all of this. The Ethereum network does this. The Ethereum network allows for, finance at the speed of light. Hey, we're actually doing tokenization on Ethereum, so now you can trade your other things with us at a much faster with lower fees, and so on and so forth. So they're going to have so much shilling going on in the background. You're not going to see most of it because it's going to be done in their private channels, but that's going to bring in trillions of dollars into this asset class over the next 10 years. And BTC and ETH won't be the only things that have ETFs over the next 10 years, but it is going to bring in literally trillions of dollars, guys, because if only you know, and this is on the low side of things. I think it's going to be more than this. I think we're going to see crypto allocations go up to 5 to 10% generally of a person's portfolio. But let's say that it's at 1%. And let's say that the total amount of money in the asset management sphere right now is, and this is globally, right? But let's say right now within, there's globally, but I wanted to say within the US. I don't know what the actual number is here. But let's just say it, for argument's sake, is like, I mean, there's BlackRock at 10 trillion, and then there's the others as well, like Vanguard, another maybe 10 trillion or less than there, and then all the other ones. Let's just say it's like $40 trillion or something like that. So 1% of $40 trillion is $400 billion, right? That's only 1%. And I'm actually checking my math over here because 400 billion. I knew that was right. So $400 billion, that's only 1%. Now, let's imagine that they up that to 5%. So 5% of $40 trillion is $2 trillion, guys. Like, that's $2 trillion entering the ecosystem. It's not going to happen all at once, but over the next 5-10 years, on top of all the other money or entering the ecosystem from everywhere else. This is just the ETFs that are going to bring this kind of money in here. And what do you think that's going to do to the price of ETH and BTC? You know, what do you think it's going to do to the price of other things that get ETFs? And it's obviously going to rely on the way these things are weighted, but I do think that a portfolio will eventually be 50-50 ETH and BTC. I do think that eventually they'll be considered equal, especially if their market caps close, because a lot of the weighting tends to be done based on a market cap kind of basis here. So if ETH and BTC are very similar in market cap at some point, then a 50-50 split would make a lot of sense. Whereas right now, it would be more like a 70-30 split because of the market cap differences here. But I do think we're going to get to that 50-50 split there. So could you imagine $1 trillion of fresh capital going into ETH over the next 5 years? Need I remind you, ETH's current market cap is less than half of that. Market cap, right? Market cap. We all know that, you know, $1 in equals more than $1 addition to the market cap. You have maybe a 10 or 20x multiple on that. So imagine if $1 trillion of fresh money comes in over the next 10 years, that could be $20 trillion of market cap added to ETH. You see where I'm going with this, right? You see how crazy this can get. In 10 years' time, ETH could very well be $100,000 plus, as I've said before. By the end of the decade, it could be that. Maybe I'm getting too bullish. Maybe I'm getting too ahead of myself. But this is the kind of numbers we're dealing with here. So to go back to the original kind of statement here around Ethereum and Ether needing a central narrative or a central visualization around what a mainstream Ethereum technology will look like. The mainstream normie audience that interacts with on-chain stuff, they'll be doing that at the L2s. They probably won't know about Ethereum. But Ethereum will be known within the circles where it matters in order for ETH to be to remain a very strong store of value where it will gradually go up over time. I have zero doubts about that, guys. Like, I have never been more confident of anything in my life than I am, and I've been this confident about ETH for a very long time now, that ETH will continue to trend up over time against USD and against other fiat currencies. And I also believe it'll trend up against BTC over time. It'll take longer than people will like it to take. Maybe the flipping happens in 10 years instead of like 5 years or something like that. I don't know. I still believe that ETH is going to be worth more than BTC one day, but these things tend to take time. And I do believe that ETH is still going to be outperforming USD, especially, and other fiat currencies in a really big way over the coming years to come there. Now, last thing from MWJ ETH that I want to cover. He just asked, what's your favorite potato dish? And the reason why he asked this was because Eric Balchunas, one of the Bloomberg ETF guys, called ETH small potatoes once, and it became a meme. He later apologized for calling it small potatoes, and I think he did that once the ETH ETFs were approved or shortly before they were approved. But my favorite potato dish, I mean, I love potatoes, like absolutely love them. Sweet potatoes, whatever it is, I love them. But I'm kind of a normie when it comes to potatoes. I'm happy just chopping up a potato, putting it in the air fryer with some oil, with some olive oil and paprika for 20 minutes, and then eating it like that with some sriracha, which is for those of you who don't know, a spicy condiment. That's what I like. That's how I like my potatoes there. But anyway, enough about my interest in food. Last thing before I wrap up today's very long episode. Wow, I've almost gone for an hour here. RH asked me to cover ETH Sydney. Now, I didn't cover this because I went to ETH Sydney and there were no refuels happening, and then I went on my break. So ETH Sydney was fucking amazing, honestly. Like, it was a perfect way to kind of like start my break, so to speak, where I went there. It was honestly crazy. I went there. I went straight into it. There was so much happening. There was Pragma that happened, and there was the hackathon. There were so many side events. I met up with so many people, had so many conversations, non-stop, really. I don't know if I mentioned this on on one of my other episodes, but there was a period of time where I was at ETH Pragma Sydney, where I stood in the same spot for 8 hours straight because people kept coming up to me to talk to me. It was packed. There was so many people there. People kept coming up to talk to me about everything Ethereum, and I literally didn't realize 8 hours had passed. My friend came up to me and said, dude, you know you've been standing here for a very long time. And I hadn't looked at my watch or anything, or even my phone. And I looked and I'm like, oh, wow. And I worked it out in my head. I'm like, wow, I've actually stood in this same spot for 8 hours straight. Because people were bringing me drinks and stuff too. Like people were like, oh, do you want water? I'm going to the bar or something. I'm like, yeah, sure. And I didn't even have to move for that. So I literally stood in the same spot for 8 hours. And of course I realized I had to pee at that point because I had just been so involved with talking with people. That was the highlight for me, honestly, just given that how many people were just coming up and talking to me about Ethereum. I love it. It was like an 8 hour long Daily Gwei Refuel episode essentially. But yeah, that was probably the highlight of the event for me. But there were so many other cool things that happened. A lot of great talks at Pragma. A lot of really cool projects built at the hackathon, which I did retweet. You can probably find that somewhere on my Twitter there. I was a judge there as well. Got to meet all of the teams building. They were all so passionate about what they were building, guys. Like, if anything, I've always said this, like, I bet on the Ethereum builder community. It's just so good. I mean, this was the first ETH global event in Sydney, so it was relatively small compared to other places around the world because it's Sydney, right? It's Australia. Like, people don't really want to travel here from Europe and the US, and I mean, I don't blame them because I know what it's like to travel to Europe from where I am. It's a minimum 25-hour trip and a lot of jet lag, right? So it was a lot of the local community. But still people from other places like Asia and India as well, and at least from what I saw. But it was a really strong showing for the fact that Australia generally has it's a relatively small crypto community because our population is like 25 million. It's not that big of a country generally, and most of those people aren't into crypto. But yeah, I know. I just wanted to say that I had a really great time there. It was really awesome. Everyone was in really high spirits. There was so much going on. It was hard to keep up with. There were so many people I talked to, so many old friends that I caught up with as well. I mean, I had really long conversations with Kane from Synthetics. I love talking with him because he's an OG like myself. We were just reminiscing on the good old days. But what he's building with Infinex and what him and his team are building with Infinex is super interesting. So if you haven't checked out Infinex yet, be sure to do so. I'm not an advisor and investor in Infinex. I'm not shilling it to you guys just because of that. I just was talking to Kane for a long time about it, and what they're doing with Infinex is awesome. So I highly recommend checking it out if you haven't yet. But I think on that note, that's going to be it for today's episode. So thank you everyone for listening and watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the newsletter, join the Discord channel, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Thanks everyone.